if you don't have all the information readily available and you just assume all shipments are created equal, this is where we've seen a lot of our customer base have issues where they did not plan based off of the amount of time required to take in each type of shipment. And they take sometimes some of the most complex shipments all at the same time, which is really very time consuming, but also inefficient for the rest of the warehouse.
Growing a business requires a holistic approach that extends beyond sales and marketing. This approach needs alignment among people, processes, and technologies. So if you're a business owner, operations, or finance leader looking to learn growth strategies from your peers and competitors, you're tuned into the right podcast. Welcome to the WBS Podcast, where scalable growth using business systems is our number one priority. Now, here is your host, Sam Gupta.
Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the WBS Podcast. I'm Sam Gupta, your host and principal consultant at digital transformation consulting firm Elevate IQ. There's a lot that goes into planning for a warehouse. Some warehouses are complex, while others may not be as complex depending upon the shipment types and the influx of shipments. If you don't plan well, it may lead to poor utilization of labor and inefficiencies in the warehouse. It may also lead to missing sales opportunities due to the unavailability of products or missing due dates for your customers. Scheduling of distribution center plays a crucial role in ensuring that you can ship at the right time while maintaining your warehouse efficiencies at the optimum levels. In today's episode, we have our guest, Deema Adada, who discusses how distribution centers work and their planning. She also describes best practices for managing the workload at distribution centers and space utilization. Finally, she has had time to explain several concepts, including upstream and downstream supply chain and exception handling. Let me introduce Deema to you. Deema Adada is the founder and CEO of GetSet, an early-stage startup working to unlock growth for shippers. Prior to funding GetSet, Deema spent 15 years at high-growth logistics companies, including Uber Freight and Coyote Logistics, where she held leadership roles across the strategy and sales functions. With that, let's get to the conversation. Hey Deema, welcome to the show.
Hi, Sam. Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here today.
And I'm super excited as well. Just to kick things off, do you want to start with your personal story and current focus?
Yeah. So I've been in the logistics industry for a little over 15 years now and very much focused on providing transportation to shippers in order to get products from A to B. Became, more passionate about the industry as I had more opportunity to work with different shippers and really get insight on what drives their business. So, over time, after watching more and more carriers trying to coordinate with the shippers to ultimately pick up or deliver product into their warehouses, kept seeing a consistent point of friction that was occurring in acquiring an appointment, but also actually meeting the expectations of that appointment for on-time arrival, pickup, and delivery of product. So I started to look into this space a little bit more and really try to understand, where does this friction come from between transportation and distribution? How do we improve this handoff between the two industries that are heavily dependent on one another, on each other's success in order to meet on-time KPIs for their customer base? So as I spent more time with shippers and warehouses, I started to understand not that it's just impactful to the transportation provider who needs to get in and out on time, but also the impact it was having on the operations team internally into the warehouse, their labor management, forklift drivers, and how disruptive it is to the operation when the planned schedule doesn't go as planned. And that's really where I started focusing my time and where GetSet came about.
Okay, amazing. And, from my experience, since I spent some time in the transportation space, obviously there are a lot of moving parts, and I can certainly agree with your comment about the friction. So obviously we are going to dig deeper into that. But before we do that, we have one of the standard questions that we ask every single guest that come on the show. And that is going to be your perspective on growth. When you think of word business growth, what does it mean to you, Deema?
I think business growth in this context is being able to actually grow the amount of transactions that can occur. In my instance, growth is focused on how many shipments can we transact at a warehouse level, at a shipper level, while holding cost or labor constant. And for me, that measures success.
Okay, amazing. So now let's dig a little bit deeper into overall distribution center. As you know, the audience for this podcast is going to be manufacturing distribution, and some of the listeners that we have, they are not as large as the ones that you might have experience with. So obviously these guys need to know, once they are going to grow, how things are going to appear, and that's where you can add a lot of value. So describe to me, overall the functionality of distribution center. So I don't know how the planning works when you look at different distribution center. Let's say if I'm a manufacturer, I'm probably doing 40-50 million dollar in revenue, and I need to plan my distribution centers. So what will be your approach in planning for the distribution centers? How they should be planned in a warehouse, or how the warehouses should be planned? Should it be based on the delivery requirements for the customer? Should it be based on the retailers that you are serving? So what is your experience overall in designing the distribution architecture and probably warehouse?
Yeah, I think manufacturing is very interesting because there are production plans and different products that are going to be produced at different timelines. Oftentimes, there can be disruption on the production line, and what is planned doesn't actually end up being what is executed. But oftentimes when these manufacturing production plans go into place, there is communication with transportation providers to basically be prepared and be ready at a location to take product from production to the next point of distribution. So we actually work with somebody in the similar space where they'll get a call and be told, we have 30 trucks coming in. We've got this product running from manufacturing right now. Be prepared to see the influx of shipments. So what, the distribution center then in turn needs to do is actually plan the number of resources or forklift drivers they're going to need on a given day for this influx of business that's going to come in. It may not be a constant. It may not be the same number of shipments that comes in daily, but they'll have like these ebbs and flows that are associated with the manufacturing side of the business. And oftentimes it becomes more difficult to not only plan what time can you take these trucks in, but you also have other products that are coming in to then also manage and organize around from that schedule. So when we look at manufacturing, we want to always look at the predictability of actually seeing product come out of the plant basically as scheduled, or likelihood. We start to see some of the trends that occur there based off of product type and what's being manufactured. So we look at the trend line, the likelihood of receiving the number of shipments on a given day, and then planning labor against that based off of the number of trucks that may arrive at a facility on that proposed period of time.
Okay, so when you plan these shipments, let's say if you have 30 trucks coming in, obviously you can plan it many different ways. So in your experience, what are some of the best practices or the worst practices that you have seen in planning for the shipments, so that you are able to utilize your time effectively, you are able to utilize your resources effectively? So do you have any sort of stories in terms of the planning that you have seen at the distribution center level, where you have seen some challenges versus a distribution center where things were going super smooth?
Yeah, I think we've seen it both ways. So there's a lot that actually goes into planning an arrival or departure of product from the warehouse. Yeah. It's the product type, the nature of what's required when you're bringing in a shipment, if it needs to be relabeled, if it needs to be broken down and then placed into different areas of the warehouse. And if you don't have all the information readily available and you just assume all shipments are created equal, this is where we've seen a lot of our customer base have issues where they did not plan based off of the amount of time required to take in each type of shipment. And they take sometimes, some of the most complex shipments all at the same time, which is really very time consuming, but also inefficient for the rest of the warehouse. So that's a use case where we see, poor utilization of the labor based off of the requirements tied to what's flowing in and out of the warehouse. Other warehouses have less complexity in the sense that, the product that they receive or ship out is fairly consistent. Their SKUs are not as many or don't require as many touch points, handling, breaking down of pallets, et cetera. And typically there are some more standardized processes associated with that where we can say the average time for product XYZ is this, this, or that. So we actually assign durations to the product type where we can plan resources accordingly, where we don't almost, you may want to call it double booking, but overlap some of the most complex orders at the same time. So it is dependent on, product type and the type of warehouse or distribution center that we're working with. But it's a matter of actually defining kind of the rules associated with what's flowing in and out to have a more smooth workflow throughout the day.
Okay, so when you're working on these scheduling requirements, let's say if you're in the warehouse, right? So there are a couple of ways to do this. Number one is going to be, let's say if you have 30 trucks coming in, based on your example, and those 30 trucks obviously needs to be filled. And, number one thing that you need to make sure is the customers are able to get their deliveries on time. So that is going to be one of the variables that you need to sort of consider when you are putting these products on the truck. But there are going to be some other variables as well that you need to keep in mind, especially it's going to be around the space utilization on the trucks. So what are some of the best practices that you have seen overall in terms of packing the shipments and putting on the truck? And making sure the space is utilized well, and the KPIs that are going to be from the customer's perspective are being met as well.
Yeah, we are definitely looking at like the RDD date, receive delivery date, as a key metric to ensure that we are meeting on-time performance. So as we look at the number of shipments flowing in and out, there are a couple priorities, right? So priority of shipment in terms of delivery requirement, as well as priority of shipment coming in that's tied to a shipment going out, right? So if we have 2 trucks that we know are bringing in product, but 1 truck is actually bringing in product that is going back out potentially same day, which does occur quite often, we then prioritize how we are going to look at the scheduling and prioritization of every appointment that's scheduled throughout the day. So we're looking upstream and downstream across the supply chain to understand how we should prioritize the day, and if there are issues that do occur, that we're able to identify them quickly enough and notify again up and downstream if the proposed time for the truck arrival does not meet the requirements of the customer.
So some of the listeners may not be familiar with the terms upstream and downstream supply chain. Do you want to describe how they work? And if you have any sort of stories around that, obviously we would love to hear them.
Yeah, I mean, we talk about manufacturing, right? So manufacturing could be, raw material, raw goods that go into a product that may go through a life cycle of 3 or 4 partners to produce the final good, right? We talk about grains that go into food that then go into products we buy every day. So in the instance, when we talk upstream or downstream, let's say we're at a point where we've now sent food material into somebody like a craft who's then going to produce certain products with it. In the instance that we're sending something into craft and it's coming from a manufacturer and we're in the middle, right? Or a distribution center is kind of the in-between point of raw goods to making it to the next step. If there's going to be a delay or we can't get a truck to be picking up product based on a craft's due date, we would then need to notify the manufacturer that, either the timing of when you're bringing in product does not meet the delivery requirements of our customer. So that would be upstream, so who it's coming from. And downstream would be notifying craft that we won't be able to make it in time to make basically for their production, right? If it's going to be put into production of their food goods. So when we look at the supply chain and when we look at transportation, missing a shipment may not seem as impactful, but that shipment actually eventually may not make it to the grocery shelf at the end of the day, right? It's lost sales. And oftentimes now the due dates are very tight because there's not enough space to store enough product to kind of create that buffer. So the handoff is really critical, and being able to communicate in real time of these changes and allowing somebody like Kraft to say, okay, well, if that's the case, we're going to go source from our other distribution center. Those are the types of communications we're looking to improve to help keep the supply chain moving ultimately.
Okay, so when you were working on these, obviously you were focusing on the scheduling and you found an area where there were significant problems, especially around the scheduling. So what were some of the challenges that you have seen when you were working in the scheduling? And did you use any sort of existing ERP or WMS system and you found this challenge there? So can you describe through the process, maybe take an example of a story where, what were the challenges, what kind of business, what kind of shipments and then just walk us through the process of what were the challenges that you found in the scheduling that you had to find this app.
Yeah. So, I always came from the transportation perspective, and
Yeah.
we continued to see that not many shippers had actually had any technology around scheduling a dock time. So there's this email exchange that occurs that says, hey, I've got this product, I'd like to bring it in, or I need to pick up. Here's my purchase order number. When can we come in? And so there's this email or phone call exchange that occurs that like narrows down on a time. Oftentimes it may not be the perfect appointment for the carrier. So they're just taking the best appointment that was offered to them. And there's times that there's no accountability. Well, I received different information. I thought our appointment was for one. There's no way to like really trace back often these email communication and phone calls. And then there's also the time that it takes to actually get a hold of somebody at the warehouse to secure the appointment. So you may send an email, but you may not hear back to the next day. And in our industry, time is money. We cannot wait that long to secure an appointment, then, provide the driver tied to the appointment. So, one piece is how do we streamline this piece? Like if the shipper has a particular schedule, they know how many forklift drivers they have, they know how many trucks they could typically take on a day based off of their resources. Why can we not create something that allows the carrier to access that and self-select the best appointment for them based off of the particular parameters associated with that purchase order? To eliminate this back and forth, the customer service representative spends their whole day talking to trucking companies, trying to coordinate and manage the schedule. But then in turn, what we're seeing is like more than 30% of these drivers actually don't show up or show up late or show up early. And the impact is really on the labor force at the warehouse, who are oftentimes hit with 10 trucks waiting in front of their warehouse all at the same time. And they're slammed. They try to take them all at the same time. And then in the afternoon, they're just sitting around. Like they are waiting for trucks to come in. These ebbs and flows are not utilizing the labor source effectively. Oftentimes, it also creates over workload. So they're delaying the next trucks that are coming in, and there's a cost associated with it. There's a dwell time 2-hour window that you can load or unload a truck without being charged detention fees or dwell fees. So we are looking at it as how do we, one, coordinate in the most effective way the number of trucks that are coming in at a certain time without having somebody have to like look at the WMS schedule system, just like can ping the schedule system, see what inventory is available. Yeah. We kind of sit in between and allow the carrier to select the best appointment for themselves. There's clear accountability. It's in the system, what time, who selected it. Both parties can see that, and both parties can communicate through the system to say, hey, there's a delay, there's an issue, we need to do X, Y, Z, versus like having an email sit in an inbox for 10 plus hours or to the next day.
Okay, amazing. So in this particular case, is the WMS systems that you had seen, they did not have any sort of scheduling functionality. So you mentioned that, typically the customer service reps are going to be doing this coordination, and there was a lot of manual effort involved. And then in the pre-show, I think we discussed about the exception handling as well. So how does the exception handling work in this particular case? Is the exception handling going to be relevant even with the solution that you are talking about? And or are you going to be able to remove the problems related to exception handling when you have this fancy app that is actually going to provide them the schedule, and they can select based on that, and they can come in whenever they feel comfortable?
Yeah, we look at it two ways. One, we can reduce the number of exceptions just with the tool, and one, allowing the carrier to select the appointment that best fits their driver's schedule. But creating the flexibility, let's say if a driver is running late and there's a later appointment, to be able to select that as well. But the second piece is we're actually looking to gain the visibility into the ETA of the trucks so that we can better plan the day for the labor force. So for instance, if you've got some trucks coming in early, some trucks coming in late, how do we best optimize based off of what's happening there to keep our team on track and focused on the task at hand rather than trying to problem solve some of these issues. We also send out a notification at the beginning of every day to say, just confirming, this is your appointment time. will you be arriving in time, in order to gain that visibility early on in the day to plan accordingly.
Okay, so one of the challenges that I often face, and I am typically involved in a lot of different enterprise architecture projects, as you know, my background, right? So obviously these systems are great. I mean, there's no question about that. They provide a very unique functionality that might not be available through, let's say, WMS or ERP. But I am often struggling in terms of alignment overall in the enterprise architecture. So let's say if I'm the manufacturer or the distributor. So how would the process work, if I'm utilizing this app for the scheduling function? And obviously this is going to be very convenient for my customer service apps because they don't have to make calls. They don't have to do the manual coordination that they were doing. And now, it's going to be done primarily in the self-serve mode. So is this app going to talk, let's say, the WMS system? Because the app needs to know different drivers. It needs to know a lot of things, right? From the shipment perspective, the app needs to know probably the shipments as well, because there has to be some sort of tie-up. So how is the overall process coordination going to work, let's say from ERP to WMS to this app?
Yeah, exactly. We are looking at understanding, because it's not just a transportation piece that is disruptive to fulfillment and distribution, right? It is the product available? Do I have enough product to fulfill this order? Do I have to ship short? Do we cancel the order from here, or do we source from another location, right? So there's definitely, the future play of wanting to be able to get visibility to those situations and help support with the right information. So if it's transportation or inbound load that's ultimately going to cause you not to have product on hand that was planned with the ERP system, planning, et cetera, being able to identify that early on enough to make decisions without it being so cost prohibitive, right? We've got our customer today who scrubs the WMS 24 hours before shipments go because they're tied to manufacturing. So if a full production line doesn't get completed, they don't really know till right before the order ships. And there's a lot of back and forth that occurs within that last stretch between planning and execution. And there should be a way for us to kind of automate that in the sense to say, here's the likelihood, the predictability, how much we have left to fill an order, and providing that information back upstream, right, through the ERP or through the right teams associated with that order, and even back down to the carrier to say, we're going to cancel it, and we're giving them enough notice that they can then go pick up a different order rather than coming into the warehouse and waiting around to receive that information. So there's definitely a benefit for us to do those types of integrations in the future and be able to support those decisions that are being made today, maybe more on a manual basis.
Amazing. And when we look at manufacturing, I think there are many different manufacturing verticals, right? So sometimes that could be vague in my experience. So when you look at this specific problem, have you seen this in specific manufacturing verticals? Let's say, is this primarily based on the size of the shipment? Is it going to be across the manufacturing? And manufacturing could range anywhere from, let's say, your automotive manufacturing to your electronics manufacturing to your food and beverage to, I don't know. I mean, it's all over the place, right? Whichever product that we are seeing on a daily basis, it's all over the place. And the distribution is all over the place as well. So do you see this problem in a specific vertical? Do you have any stories? Because so far, you have spoken about food and beverage. Do you have any food and beverage stories or other stories from the other industries where you have seen similar problems?
Well, so we heavily see it in the food and beverage. Anything that's a fast-moving good, where there's not really a lot of time that occurs between production through the life cycle of a product, that's really where it's the most impactful. Where we've got things that are produced on a much smaller level and have the ability to be stored in a warehouse for more than a week, it's a different story, right? There's more visibility, there's more time to act on it. So this in particular, when we talk about manufacturing, to me is driven mostly by fast-moving goods.
So when you say fast-moving goods, I mean, is there a timeline that needs to be met in case of fast-moving goods? Because you made a comment related to the storage in the warehouse. So in the other manufacturing industries, do you not have this time sensitivity? Can you talk a little bit more about that?
The reason we look at the fast-moving goods and just the ability to store today and just the warehousing capacity that exists has become extremely tight. So we went from a mindset initially where it was like, okay, we're going to store all this product, and it gives us that buffer to get product to market, even in quicker timelines. To, okay, we're going to be super agile. We're going to be able to plan more accurately in a shorter period of time. wonderful, great. Now we're back in the position where, we went through COVID and there just wasn't enough product on hand to support the demand, right? So there is a happy medium that kind of exists now of being able to create this buffer and inventory on hand for these types of products that would allow them to move more quickly if there is a spike in product demand. I don't know to what level and what vertical are mostly impacted by these purchasing behaviors and demand, but we do just see it in these goods that are obviously food and beverage is higher in demand. Automotive is very tight from a manufacturing perspective, right? Like Ford, GM have astronomical fees associated with shutting a production line down. So those are, bigger scale problems to solve. I can't imagine that even on a smaller scale, companies have similar constraints around the amount of time and inventory they can keep on hand in order to meet their demand.
Okay, so other than scheduling, have you seen any other problems? Can you share any of these stories of the recent engagements that you have worked on?
So we are actually looking also further into the labor management side of the business. It's been very difficult to recruit and bring in experienced labor force, and the demand has gotten higher. So even looking at the productivity of the labor force on site and all of the activities that occur throughout the day and being able to measure and train and be able to do it in a fast moving environment has been a challenge. So looking at how we could potentially bring some value in creating processes, like automated processes for the labor force to be able to have some guidance throughout the day and measure the KPIs to really drive efficiency there, because they just can't hire fast enough. There's just not enough out there to meet the demand of what these warehouses need from a resource perspective.
Okay. Since you come from a lot of, the TMS and WMS and warehousing background, are you seeing any specific technologies that you are super excited about right now when you look at the efficiency of the warehouse? Obviously, this scheduling technology is going to be amazing overall in reducing the coordination, but are you seeing any other technologies that might play along with what you are working on?
Yeah, we're seeing a lot more in the WES space, execution platforms that sit on top of multiple systems to really gather business intelligence and support that execution component. We've seen a lot of pieced together technology that don't necessarily speak to one another or don't collect the right format of data in order to be able to give the right type of information or prescriptive, I should say, workflow for the warehouse. So it's an interesting space. I think there's a lot of opportunity there as I've been, talking to more locations and hearing, different types of tech stacks and oftentimes like very old WMSs, if at all, and how that's really driving some change there as well.
Okay, so some of the listeners may not be familiar with WES. They might not even be familiar with WMS, to be honest. So can you talk about some of the features that you have seen in case of WMS versus WES? And what are some of the newer features that you have seen in the WMS space? Overall, since you mentioned there might be some of the older WMS systems. So how were the older WMS system? Can you describe some of those features and, just describe the evolution overall of the WMS space?
The WES sits on top of WMS, sits on top of the ERP and the TMS, and is more of a centralized hub across all functions in order to basically give visibility across their supply chain.
All right, amazing. That's it for today, Deema. Do you have any last minute closing thoughts by any chance?
Yeah, I think that it is a really interesting time to be a part of the shipping network and seeing all the evolution that's taking place from a technology standpoint and how really we've seen shippers quickly evolve to the changes that have happened over the last year. And it's really amazing to see the resilience that we've seen in the supply chain. So I'm excited to be a part of that evolution and seeing where things go over the next few years here.
Okay, amazing. And my personal takeaway from this conversation is going to be there is a lot more to scheduling overall than we can see. And obviously manufacturers and distributors are spending a lot of time overall in this coordination. So if we can automate that and if we can create something like Uber, that's going to be an amazing improvement overall from the logistics perspective, from the coordination perspective. On that note, Deema, I would like to thank you for your time. It's been insightful and fun conversation.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
I cannot thank our guests enough for coming on the show, for sharing their knowledge and journey. I always pick up learnings from our guests and hopefully you learned something new today. If you want to learn more about Deema, head over to getset.io. It's GETSETT.io and sign up for a demo. Links and more information will also be available in the show notes. If anything in this podcast resonated with you and your business, you might want to check other related episodes, including the interview with Chuck Coxhead from Procensus, who discusses warehouse mobility trends in the enterprise and SMB markets. Also, the interview with Kevin Lawton from the New Warehouse podcast, who discusses why standardization plays a key role in inventory planning. Also, don't forget to subscribe and spread the word among folks with similar backgrounds. If you have any questions or comments about the show, please review and rate us on your favorite podcasting platform or DM me on any social channels. I'll try my best to respond personally and make sure you get help. Thank you, and I hope to catch you on the next episode of the WBS Podcast.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the WBS Podcast. Be sure to subscribe on your favorite podcasting platform so you never miss an episode. For more information on growth strategies for SMBs using ERP and digital transformation, check out our community at WBS.rocks. We'll see you next time.